We're going to move on to Sean Dwyer, who's going to bring us home, in a lot of ways, sum up the day as we talk about higher purposes in entrepreneurship and how they connect. So, Sean, I turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Corey. Appreciate it. Great presentations today. I'm going to go ahead and post two articles that will be relevant for this conversation. And I'm going to share my screen. If I could get a confirmation that it's showing, that'd be fantastic. Awesome. Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Tara. Thank you for everyone for participating today. It's such an honor to be here. Today's presentation is going to be about higher purposes in religious entrepreneurship. I've been passionate about the topic of purpose for over a decade now. Did my dissertation on the topic. But over the past decade, I've asked people the question, what is your purpose? And it's been so interesting and fun hearing from entrepreneurs what they have to say about this topic. Oftentimes you'll hear things like, I don't know what my purpose is. But I found that when people know their purpose and they're pursuing it, it can have powerful psychological effects. And we know that from the psychology literature as well. And I think if we step back and you ask the question, well, what do we mean by purpose? I'll dive into that a little bit. I think if we were to ask our students today, what does it mean to be purpose driven? What does it mean to have purpose? They're typically going to describe something about making a positive difference or a contribution to others. So that's kind of the conceptualization that we're going with today when we're talking about purpose. This past fall, I launched a program at OU with one of my coworkers called the Purpose Forum, and it was challenging students to think through what is my purpose and how does it relate to my work and how can I live that out in the business world. And in that class, we talked about where does purpose come from? And there's different sources of purpose we can see from the literature. Maybe from a social learning perspective, you see a mentor doing something. I want to be like that person. Or maybe you've experienced something traumatic and you want to help others in that way. But one really common place of purpose is religion. Religion provides prescriptive purposes, we could say, where the religious ideologies, beliefs say, hey, this is purposeful, this is not purposeful. So when we kind of blend this together, what we're saying, what I'm going to be talking about today is purpose that's driven by religious beliefs. So I'm going to dive in. I'm a qualitative researcher, so let's just do a little quick mental exercise. Let's imagine we're interviewing an entrepreneur and we ask, what is wrong with the world? We sit back, we listen, we take some notes. We ask another question. What does the world need more than anything? We ask, we wait, we take more notes. And then finally we ask, what's your role to play in addressing this need? What these questions are ultimately getting at is an idea of maybe what we could call a worldview. How do they see the world? How do they see the world? Is it a broken place? Is it a place that needs to be restored? And then what's their role in the world? What's their relationship with others? If it's from a religious perspective, what's their relationship with a higher power, a God, a deity in some sort of fashion? So that's what I want to just touch on real quick before I get into something else. But what is a worldview? If we look at perspective here, from existential philosophy, a philosopher named Carl Jaspers would say a worldview is indeed, it's more than just knowledge. It includes what's sometimes contrasted with a view of life, the way in which an individual will evaluate things. What matters to them? Absolutely. What only has relative importance and how, in consequence, he'll behave and act. More recent research. The world brings to order the world of the subject by helping them separate what is a life worthy for them, what is irrelevant, what is fitting for life, and what is not. And this worldview helps answer existential questions such as what does and what doesn't matter in life, what is worth living for, or perhaps even what's worth dying for. And then what is the purpose of life? And perhaps even what is the purpose of my life? And as we think about the intersection of entrepreneurship and religion, I just want to challenge scholars to consider a religious worldview. It significantly influences how individuals see the world. A particular entrepreneur that perhaps holds a Buddhist belief system is going to see the world completely different, perhaps, than one that's really holding fast to, let's say, a Christian worldview. So in this respect, the study that I worked on, I'll be sharing about in just a little bit, the entrepreneurs were held fast very deeply to Christian worldview. And so if we take a look at this quote here, what religion does is it provides an ultimate vision of what people should be striving for in their lives. So it's prescriptive and it says this is what should be done. And so in some ways, religion can provide answers to, and we've seen this a lot in the surge of research in religious entrepreneurship, answers to the question of who am I? And that question of who am I now begs an additional question of what am I supposed to do? What do I do with this? So this idea of higher purposes, it really stems out of this identity. What am I to do? And if we go back to what I was mentioning earlier, what impact should I make? And ultimately, this influences entrepreneurial action. So this is just a high level theoretical, very basic theoretical model where religious beliefs shape identity, which then forms the higher purposes which influence entrepreneurial action. And you can see here a quote from scholars that have already spoken today. Religion may challenge the very core of the entrepreneurial purpose. And I would argue that this is one of the ways in which this happens. So if we take a look back at a seminal work by Brad and colleagues in 2019, we see just a framework here for how religion influences entrepreneurial action. And what we can see is religious knowledge comes together with religious identity, perhaps a personal calling, religious development to shape people's views of opportunities, what's worthy of pursuing, what's not worthy of pursuing, in leading to entrepreneurial action. And what you'll see here are four outcomes of religious entrepreneurship. And what's interesting about this is all of them we could potentially classify as higher purposes. They're all other oriented in some capacity: financial gain for others, service to others, sharing of religion with others, honoring God as another being as well. So if we step back, if I were to ask everyone on this call right now this question, I think we would get a broad array of answers. From a higher purpose perspective, the way that I'm looking at it, I would argue that one potential answer to this question of how does religion influence entrepreneurship would be that religious beliefs can provide a worldview that shapes how some entrepreneurs interpret reality. And this religious worldview can shape their identity, that question of who am I? And this religious identity, in turn, will drive the higher purposes that they seek to pursue through their ventures. So, what was meant by the term higher purposes? If we were to ask our students today, I was mentioning this earlier, what does it mean to be purpose driven? Gen Z right now is considered the most purpose driven generation of our time. Typically, what we're going to be thinking about is that contribution, something beyond themselves. If you've read this book before, The Purpose Driven Life, super popular book, it opens with the line, it's not about you. So purpose innately is about something beyond yourself, about creating value for others, just as the previous presentation was discussing, the value creation for other people. So if we look at the psychology literature on purpose, there's a stream that would say, a purpose or a higher purpose, it's something related to a long-term intentional commitment to make a personally meaningful difference in the world beyond yourself. So moving on from this idea of higher purpose involves efforts to impact others. And we know this is not new to the entrepreneurship literature. Where we think of the social entrepreneurship literature or even work by Fauchard and Gruber, some entrepreneurs seek to establish a platform from which they can pursue their political visions and advance particular causes. This was describing the missionary entrepreneurial identity in which individuals use their business to advance some sort of particular cause. And I think from a religious entrepreneurship perspective, that particular cause can be tied to their religious beliefs. And I think something fabulous from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is this table here, which shows that around the world, in certain countries, entrepreneurs want to make a difference, even more so than they want to generate high income. I think which just shows evidence entrepreneurs of today are pursuing higher purpose. So if we bring this into religious entrepreneurship, what does that look like? There's a paper in JBV by Pittick and colleagues describing transcendent faith. And it says a mental state which sustains belief and action over time through linking ongoing actions to higher purposes through the development of self-transcendence. So I think what we see here is these higher purposes in the context of religious entrepreneurship are goals that are aimed beyond the self. This is a quote from recent research from myself and Dr. Neubert. The pursuit of higher purpose reflects efforts to achieve goals focused on theologically driven pursuits rather than or addition to simply economic driven pursuits. So these are goals that are grounded in religious beliefs. So we might call these religious goals. We can tie this into higher purposes. So going back to this question of earlier that I was talking about, where do these higher purposes come from? In the context, in a religious entrepreneurship context, many of these higher purposes are likely to come from sacred religious texts. So if I bring back this framework, what we could see here is that these sacred texts provide the entrepreneur with a knowledge base, which then influences their identity, calling, maybe religious development, which influences ultimately the actions that they take. So financial gain for others, we know that oftentimes religious beliefs and sacred texts would encourage people to give, to be generous, to serve others, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, to share your religious beliefs with others so that they might come to the truth that you have found. And then ideas around honoring God. So this is where they would come from. This is a paper that we recently published in an Entrepreneurship Regional Development. We were part of the special issue. So grateful for the editorial team. We're really excited about this paper. So this paper, as I mentioned earlier, it was a group of entrepreneurs. They were very low income. resource scarce environment. They all are in some shape or form responsible for stewarding a religious community. So they were pastors, but they also were pursuing or running micro businesses. And what was really interesting is that each of them believed that they had a relationship with God, a relational identity with God, which was discussed earlier today, meaning and that they came to experience that relationship sometime in their life, as they would explain, through believing in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins. And that brought them into a relationship and secured heaven for them for the future. And each of them was highly motivated, deeply believed these things, and felt responsible and called by God to share these beliefs with others so that they might also enter into a relationship with God and experience a positive afterlife. So they were highly motivated. So that we would call that was their religious, their higher purpose for their venture. But at the same time, they were seeking to provide for their families, and it was a matter of household survival. So we had an interesting research context where we were able to see individuals that were highly motivated to share their faith, highly motivated, and at the same time trying to keep their families alive. And we introduce an interesting construct here called spiritual impact beliefs. And what we found that to be was when these individuals believed that they were making a difference for God, serving God, it gave them the sense of confidence or this conviction that they had done this for God. And it had powerful psychological effects. We found it affected their propensity for risk taking and also goal persistence. So stepping back, you can read the paper yourself, but just generally, religious beliefs shaped the identity of these entrepreneurs, led them to pursue higher purposes, and ultimately influenced entrepreneurial action. So, like I mentioned earlier, we drew on relational identity with God from identity theory. Smith and colleagues and JBV introduced this term where the entrepreneurs see themselves in a relationship with a supernatural being. In this form, their religious identity. So, this is a quote from our paper. The entrepreneurs believe that God expected them to serve him as part of their role in the kingdom of God. As members of the spiritual kingdom or spiritual family, they felt responsible for helping others become part of it as well by sharing their religious beliefs with them. These religious goals were grounded in the biblical command to go and make disciples of all nations. So there we go again, tying back to that sacred text where they're driving their higher purpose, and it motivates these purposes. The goals reflect a desire to serve God as part of advancing higher purposes through their ventures. Motivation grounded in transcendent beliefs about having a personal relationship with God by embracing these core tenets of the Christian faith. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. These were the things they were talking about during the interviews. They really wanted to push these ideas forward for other people. And just to tie this again, here's another verse that they frequently mention that supplied them with the religious knowledge, the motivation as well to as part of their ventures pursue this path here. And I think future research can explore these other potential outcomes. This study was focused specifically on this higher purpose. So what do we learn from the study? There's contributions to the identity literature. You can dive into those, but I just wanted to go really high level. What we find is that higher purposes influence entrepreneurial action. We found that there were four strategies these entrepreneurs engaged in. One was a witnessing strategy. So that's interacting with customers, vendors, employees in the normal course of business and sharing their religious beliefs. Another one was a signaling strategy. So that's using religious cues, naming your business as something religious like that could invoke questions, or acting ethically to hopefully provoke conversations for later. Then volunteering strategy, using the business in such a way to get time away from the business so they could get engaged with faith sharing outside of the venture context. And lastly, generating resources that they could give to support religious causes. Also, higher purposes can shape resource allocation decisions. We found that this was probably the major tension. We call these resource-based tensions, relational resources. Do I share my faith with this person, or do I keep them as a customer? Do I put that at risk? Because these individuals, they're running businesses where their family's livelihoods are dependent on it. So that was a source of tension for them. Relational resources, temporal resources. Do I spend time in the business or outside the business? Financial resources. Do I give this money away, give these resources away, or do I invest them back into the business and my family? So faith can influence resource allocation decisions. And I mentioned this earlier, increased tolerance for risk. The entrepreneurs viewed serving God as worth it. So fulfilling the expectations of that relational identity with God, they viewed it as worth it, even if it put their households at risk. Part of the reason for that was they believed in divine provision. They believed as they were faithful to God, God would be faithful to them, which is really fascinating from a psychological perspective. The willingness to embrace risk, believing in another stakeholder, but it's a supernatural stakeholder, would intervene for them. It was really fascinating from a psychological perspective. And then lastly, redefining the meaning of entrepreneurship. What we found was that these, entrepreneurs that are running chicken farms and really small businesses would reframe these, and they would describe them as kingdom businesses, part of advancing God's kingdom. They saw it as something bigger. So it gave dignity to their work in some ways. and also promoted mental health and well-being. You see a quote here, I'm happy, I'm fulfilled, I feel happy, I'm not useless in the kingdom of God. And we know from extant research this leads to goal persistence in entrepreneurship. And this was a paper I had the privilege to publish last year where we did a psychological model, and what we found was that purpose, that this sense of purpose, when it's driven by religious faith, can have profound effects on the persistence, goal persistence of entrepreneurs. So welcome to check out that study. So if we come back, this is going to be the last two slides. What do we learn about higher purposes in religious entrepreneurship? One, they direct entrepreneurial goals. This can shift the conversation around what it means to be successful in entrepreneurship. Spiritual impact could be one of these dimensions. They shape resource allocation decisions, increase tolerance for risk, and redefine the meaning of entrepreneurship. So my challenge to everyone here is to further explore, how do different religious worldviews influence entrepreneurial actions? So that's going to wrap up my presentation. Really appreciate you guys. Happy to connect offline as well, and grateful to share this.
Wonderful. Sean, thank you so much. I want to thank all our presenters for today. This conference really brings together the best and brightest of this conversation, of this growing conversation at the intersection of faith and entrepreneurship. We had happily many of the presenters say, I'm doing this and I'm doing this other thing. Check me out over here. Check me out over there. Please. The way that we expand this conversation is to share, to cite each other, to work together, to build up this conversation. So, to all our presenters across today, I'm deeply grateful. Thank you for being here with us. Now, my last act in the conference is to award the Best Research Paper Award. This is the second year that we have done this. And so we look at the best research paper from the preceding year. That would be 2025 in this case. And the award goes to Sean and colleagues, Boris, Stephen, and Mitch, you heard from earlier for their paper, Psychological Perspectives on Faith-Driven Persistence in Self-Employment, the Mediating Role of Mental Health and Well-Being. So, Sean, well done. I have an award that will be shipped out to the four of you, you and your co-authors. Congratulations. Would you like to
Thank
say a
you
word
so
about
much,
the,
Corey.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh man, I'm so honored to receive that. I know my co-authors will be as well. That was, yeah, just so much thanks to Boris Nikolaev for his work and the whole team. But I appreciate the recognition and really do hope that this will push forward deeper understanding of the psychological effects of faith in the context of entrepreneurship. So super honored. Appreciate all you guys and all that you do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Leah, if you'll put up my last slide, we have some resources for friends. This is not a one-day conversation a year. As Brett said at the introduction, we have a bibliography to get you started in the research. We have a work packet for research in faith and entrepreneurship. You can have the dates for the AOM PhD seminar. If you're leading PhD students, please let us have a conversation with them. If you're going to AOM and you'd like to be more a part of these conversations, we're having a PDW. We don't have an exact date yet, but it will be announced shortly. The teaching conference is coming up in November. Be aware of that. And there's so much going on. The best thing we can do is stay in touch. We are a field of colleagues together. We need each other's work. And that's why we have this research conference. So, to all our participants and presenters, we are deeply grateful. And to everybody who came today to learn and grow together at the intersection of faith and entrepreneurship research, thank you. We'll see you next year.